As far as I'm concerned, Nigeria is a failed state. I'm sorry to say that, but some people will disagree with me. The state of Nigeria is pathetic. Right now, that we exist as a nation is a miracle.
The independence we gained was just political independence. Political independence without economic independence does not really help anybody at all.
Building a resentment that culminated in a wave of terror against the Igbo.
They were massacring and slaughtering the Igbo people in the north. Our uncles, our wives, our children, our everything. And when they slaughtered, they took our property. They took our homes. They took all the things we built there.
It was so unfortunate that the world looked on while innocent people were massacred.
The Biafrans evacuated as they fled before the federal troops.
Everybody was wailing and screaming. You could hear people crying from miles away.
We had nothing. We had nothing to fight with.
No matter the federal government's assurances that they will be safe, the Igbos flee.
They had to suffer, first of all, with the bombing and the strafing that left so many of our civilians dead. We have lost our property. We have nothing of our own.
The Igbos have gone into the bush, leaving their homes shattered by shell fire.
Unless something happens, Nigeria will cease to exist as it is.
But we live in hope that that Holy Spirit will come down on us, that he will enlighten the minds of our leaders, and that they will lead us to a true and just and lasting peace.
We must not do anything that is going to make it impossible for us to reconcile, or it will make the winning of the heart difficult in the end.
The British colony of Nigeria was created in 1914 via British colonial rule. The creation of the country we know as Nigeria was done by joining over 250 different ethnic groups in that region of West Africa that spoke different languages and practiced different faith. The three major tribes in Nigeria are the House of Fulani, the Igbo, and the Yoruba tribe. The country was divided into North and South. The House of Fulani tribe occupied the northern region. The Igbo tribe occupied the southeast region, and the Yoruba tribe occupied the southwest region. Africa is the most minerally rich continent in the world. The basis for European colonization was done in order to control the resources of the land.
Nigeria was big in agriculture then. The north was known for its groundnut production. The east was known for its yam production. The west was known for its cocoa production. All of these things were produced without added value until they were sent to European factories where they were converted into manufactured goods.
The country we know as Nigeria was created because of the agricultural products each region produced.
Nigeria being a colony of the British, the economy was structured in such a way that it became the source of raw materials for metropolitan factories in Europe. So they built railroads, they built highways, but for the interest of moving raw materials from the hinterland to the harbor where these things were shipped. So there was never a time that Nigeria as a colony was known for its manufacturing or anything. As a colony, Nigeria was the producers of raw materials and also served as a market for manufactured goods from Europe.
As Nigeria began to advance in the 1920s, one tribe stood out from the rest: the Igbo people. The Igbos excelled in the education introduced by the British and quickly emerged as the most progressive ethnic group in Nigeria. The Igbos were very unique.
It's hard to find any cultural group that is more dynamic than the Igbos.
The Igbos were responsible for building, starting so many industries in Nigeria, in every part of Nigeria, in Port Harcourt, in Kano, in Kaduna, in Lagos, in Ibadan, you name it. They were all there because we are called ubiquitous.
When Igbos go into a place, they accept that place as their place. And they get into the politics of that place. They get married to indigenous people. They get into business in there, and they help everybody else in there. That's how Igbos have always worked. Igbos don't go to a place and say, okay, hi, I'm a stranger, I just stay here and go, let me get your money and get out. No, Igbos goes in there to establish.
We are everywhere, and wherever we are, we try to build infrastructure, to help, with the development of, the particular location.
They wake up in the morning, they see an Igbo man running for council, for city council, because he wants to be a part of that group of, that culture. He doesn't want to be an outsider. That's the Igbo man, and that's why they're very successful.
The Igbos would continue to progress in Nigeria, and in the late 1950s, the Igbos would become very strong voices and would ultimately lead the independence movement from Great Britain. Nigeria gained her independence from Great Britain on October 1st, 1960. Nigerian independence meant the dawn of self-rule. The citizens of Nigeria were very excited and ready for the challenge.
When you rule yourself, you are no longer under the control of some power. So people were very happy at the time.
It meant everything for people who were around that time. It meant everything. And I witnessed it. I was only a kid. But there was celebration all over the country, free day for all the schools. It meant everything. Yeah. But nobody knew what was going to be down the road. Yeah.
Many Igbos believed that when Nigeria gained its independence in 1960, their former colonizers forged profitable business deals with the incoming leaders that they appointed before their departure. The Igbos believed that this was done to sustain their interests with the country.
Little did we know that the independence we gained was just political independence. Political independence without economic independence, does not really help anybody at all. And the people, the Nigeria was already in debt as a result of the debt bequeathed to them by their colonizers. Okay, so things started to fall apart shortly after independence due to power tussle and corruption, due to the fact that the people are of different tribes. As far as somebody could be talked into, providing the British with what they needed, that was the person or the tribe that was made the leader of the country. And those leaders continued to supply the British with what they wanted, and the British was satisfied to look the other way.
Initially, when they got their independence, they had a central government, what they call federal government. The seat of the government was in Lagos. Nigeria had what they call a prime minister, okay? And the prime minister was the head of the government, the federal government. The prime minister was the boss. Tafawa Balewa is from the north. He was the prime minister of Nigeria. And they had Nnamdi Azikiwe as what they call ceremonial president. He was the president, but he wasn't in charge of the government.
The prime minister had the voice Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, who was the president, was simply like a front person because he was very eloquent, in speaking. But Tafawa Balewa, who was the prime minister at the time, was the prime minister. He had the power to do things.
Many Igbos believe that Tafawa Balewa was strategically appointed the prime minister of Nigeria by their former colonizers. Tafawa Balewa was from the northern region of Nigeria.
Hausas were nominal head and appointed by the British because they have a reason why they want the Northerners to always be the prime ministers and all those stuff in those days. But if you look at the academics and the civil service and all this stuff, Igbos dominated it. It's well known.
The seed that was sown was intended to ensure that, there will always be social unrest in Nigeria.
The Igbos believed that the appointment of a northerner as the prime minister and head of the federal government was done deliberately to marginalize the Igbos.
The Igbos are the most educated at the time, and I believe the British saw the Igbo as too intelligent. For that reason, they did whatever they could to make sure that the Igbos were put in their place back then. Because we knew a whole lot and we were capable of leadership and all of that, and we were not subservient to anybody. I couldn't pinpoint the particular reason why the British did what they did, but I believe that the Igbo, to some extent, were seen as a threat.
The Igbos were strong-willed and not afraid to oppose the establishment. This was a trait the Igbos had that did not fare well with their former colonizers.
The British described the Igbo man as that stubborn race because they didn't get anything passed through us. Nothing.
If you tell an Igbo man to do something, he will ask questions, while others will go ahead and do that thing.
That attitude has always been what most other ethnicities cannot emulate. I think that's the unique character we have, and that's the problem we have with other tribes. And that's where the jealousy comes into play. After the independence, a lot of stuff started to come out, which under the British rule weren't there, or were there but kind of submerged underneath. Feelings, that ethnicity feelings start to reappear. I'm from North, I'm a Yoruba, I'm a Hausa, I'm an Igbo, that kind of thing started to show up again.
Tribal tension was at an all-time high in Nigeria. Although there were 3 major tribes, there were over 250 tribes in the country.
And everybody wanted their tribal person to be the leader. And with that, things did not work out as expected.
Within 6 years of independence from Great Britain, Nigeria had become a cesspool of corruption and misrule. Appointed government officials helped themselves freely to the nation's wealth. Elections were blatantly rigged, and politicians became pawns of foreign business interests. On January 15, 1966, a Nigerian military general by the name of Chukwuma Nzogwu led a military coup d'etat. Chukwuma Nzogwu was an Igbo from the southeast region of Nigeria. The military coup led by Chukwuma Nzogwu aimed to assassinate all political leaders in all regions of the country, which meant that the coup was not targeted at a specific tribe. The execution of a coup d'etat would eliminate all government officials in Nigeria, which would destroy government corruption and would ultimately allow Nigerian citizens to properly elect new government officials that would lead the country in the right direction. On January 15, 1966, the coup d'etat led by Igbo military general Chukwuma Nzogwu was in full effect. Various leaders were assassinated across the country, including the Prime Minister and head of the Nigerian federal government, Tafawa Balewa. The premier of the northern region, Ahmadu Bello, and the premier of the southwest region, Samuel Akintola, were also assassinated.
Every other governor or premier was killed during the coup in 1966, in January 15, 1966, with exception of Dr. Michael Okpara, who was an Igbo man and who was from the same place with the army general that staged the coup.
As fate would have it, the premier of the southeast Igbo region, Michael Okpara, was not killed in the coup. Also, the president of the country, Nnamdi Azikiwe, who was also an Igbo from the southeast region of Nigeria, was not killed in the coup. After the coup was carried out, a senior Nigerian military officer by the name of Aguiyi Ironsi overthrew the rest of the government and became the head of state. Aguiyi Ironsi was an Igbo from the southeast region of Nigeria.
So the rest of the country, especially the Northerners, were mad. They were furious.
After the coup had taken place, other Nigerian citizens, especially the Northerners, questioned the intention of the coup and wondered why none of the Igbo officials were killed. The fact that an Igbo was now the head of state also raised many questions as to the integrity of the coup. The Northerners perceived the coup to be an Igbo-staged coup, orchestrated by the Igbos in order to take control of the government. With this realization, there was immediate retaliation from the rest of the country. This began the vicious killing of innocent Igbos in the north and southwest region of Nigeria.
The young men who carried out the coup identified leaders that they wanted to kill. Unfortunately, not every one of those leaders was killed, and as a result, some people from other parts of the country decided that their people were in the majority of the people that were killed, and they decided to take revenge.
In May of 1966, thousands of innocent Igbo men, women, and children were killed in the pogrom. Innocent Igbo citizens were slaughtered, butchered, burned, shot, and tortured to death all over the country, especially in the north.
So the Hausas saw that coup as an Igbo coup, which it wasn't, actually. So for them, it's like loss of power. So they have to do their own coup. They killed Aguiyi Ironsi, and that's where Nigeria started to go downhill. From that point on, Nigeria has always gone downhill, has never gotten up again.
A counter-coup carried out by an army from the north was executed. During the counter-coup, Aguiyi Ironsi, an Igbo and the newly appointed head of state, was assassinated on July 29, 1966. The Northerners had taken the killings of Igbos to a whole new level. Igbo people as a whole were targets for murder, and not just Igbo political figures. The pogrom continued for several months, as thousands of Igbos were viciously murdered throughout the country, especially in the north.
When the Igbos go to church, they will descend on them and start slaughtering. Okay? In your residence where an Igbo person lives, and they know, they will come there and slaughter people. They were burning cars, killing people. There was insecurity in the country. The lives were being destroyed, property destroyed. That continued, there was instability in the country at the time.
They were massacring and slaughtering the Igbo people in the north. Our uncles, our wives, our children, our everything. And when they slaughtered, they took our property. They took our homes. They took all the things we built there.
And that's why the Igbos withdrew back to their enclave, their homeland, the eastern Nigeria back then. The Igbos fled from the north and fled from the west and concentrated back in their own homeland. Some of them still stayed, the brave ones.
The only place the Igbos were safe was in their homeland of southeastern Nigeria. Every Igbo citizen living in different parts of the country fled back to their native southeast land. Many Igbos fleeing to the southeast from the north were stopped and killed. The number of Igbo casualties fiercely grew to the thousands, and nothing was done to stop it.
They killed Igbos any way they know, any way the Hausa man knows. And the Fulanis, they did it. You know, it's something that a real Igbo man, for those people who live to see the images, don't want to talk about. If you do, you shed tears. Even your own neighbors helped to kill somebody they have lived with for 40, 30 years together. So that gives you an idea that the hatred they have for the Igbo man. Despite the fact that the Igbo man was instrumental to developing them, making them see the light, educating them in any aspect, marry their daughters, have their grandchildren, who are Hausas too, but Igbos. They still kill them after they lived amongst each other for years. So that gives you an idea that sometimes you wonder, you know, what will make people do that kind of stuff.
As early as October of 1966, there were talks of outright war in Nigeria. A new head of state was appointed in the person of Lieutenant Yakubu Gowon. Lieutenant Yakubu Gowon was from the northern region of Nigeria. The Northerners had taken back leadership and control of the country. Since Nigeria's former colonizers appointed a Northerner as the leader of the country, the Northerners saw the leadership of Nigeria as a role that only they were destined to fulfill. As far as the Northerners were concerned, no one would come in the way of the supremacy they had in Nigeria, not even the Igbos.
Unfortunately, that was the foundation laid by the British, when they were leaving, because they left the country very much divided. Nigeria is a country that has no reason being a country. You can carve out about 4 countries from Nigeria, but it was put together by the British in their own interests, knowing that the people they impressed into one country couldn't get along because they're not of the same culture. The cultures are so vastly different, that you would wonder why they are even together. But their togetherness was to serve the interests of the British.
The military governor of the Igbo Southeast region of Nigeria, by the name of Odumegwu Ojukwu, became the voice for the Igbos. As the year 1966 came to an end, there were discussions amongst the Igbos about a possible secession from Nigeria. As a last-ditch effort for peace and unity within Nigeria, to avoid a possible secession of the Igbos, representatives from all parts of the Federation decided to meet and have a conversation about the turmoil in the country. Aburi is a city in the West African country of Ghana. It was in Aburi that this meeting would take place. Igbo military general Odumegwu Ojukwu requested a neutral site outside of Nigeria for the council to gather. This gathering has been referred to as the Aburi Accord. On January 4th to January 5th, 1967, the organized summit was held, and in attendance were all top government officials from all parts of Nigeria. The parties gathered to discuss the conflicts in the country and a slew of other political issues that plagued the Federation to hopefully come to an agreement and bring peace to Nigeria.
The Biafran contingent representatives and the Nigerian representatives met to talk about peace treaty, how to resolve the problem in the country, to avoid the war.
Things were agreed to, for the sake of peace in Nigeria. That was supposed to ensure peaceful coexistence, but those agreements were ignored. They were ignored. If they hadn't been ignored, I think things would have been, a lot better.
Months after the Abuja Accord had taken place, it was apparent to the Igbos that the areas discussed in the summit would not be implemented by the northern-led Nigerian government. With this realization, the Igbos decided that secession from Nigeria was the only way. General Odumegwu Ojukwu consulted with the elders in the southeastern Igbo region of Nigeria, and upon their advisement, the Southeast was officially declared a secessionist state and no longer a part of Nigeria. On May 30th, 1967, General Odumegwu Ojukwu proclaimed the Republic of Biafra, and all its ties to Nigeria were severed.
The Igbos were forced to do what they did. If you are not wanted, last resort will be to go home. So the Igbos went home, and they decided since they are not wanted, that they'll form their own country, which is the way it should have been in the first place.
When you see your people being slaughtered, all right, the Igbos were being slaughtered in every part of Nigeria, north and west. If you were Ojukwu, what are you going to do? And remember, those areas, they had their military governors. They weren't able to stop the killing of the Igbos. They were not able. They were killing Igbos with impunity.
People are being killed, people are rushing home, people are coming home blooded. People were, with their scalps open, were running home, and hospitals were filled up, we don't have medicine, everything was there. And you're telling me, oh, please. It wasn't taken lightly, but if you hadn't taken it, the Igbo man wouldn't exist as we are today. They should understand that. We could have been pursued after being killed in the north, in the west. They could have pursued us home. We were not armed. There was nothing, we have no defense.
Look at it this way. When the Igbo were everywhere, they were being killed. Okay, so they ran home. Some on their way home were stopped and killed. Yeah. So you are home and you decided, okay, we are going to secede since we are not wanted. Since we are not wanted. Somebody had to make that decision with consultation. It was not a unilateral decision. It was with consultation from the people.
Oil had been discovered in the southeastern Igbo region of Nigeria in 1958. The oil had become a great source of revenue for Nigeria, and if the Igbos were to secede and become the Republic of Biafra, Nigeria would not have access to the revenue derived from the oil. Many Igbos believed that the British were against the secession of the Republic of Biafra from Nigeria. As far as their former colonizers were concerned, Nigeria would remain one country, even if it meant war.
The idea that the British supported Nigeria to subdue Biafra was based on oil, period. They know that if Biafra succeed as we did, it's going to be hard for them to access that oil, period. There's no two about it, they know.
All the oil reserves were in the south, in the southeast, really. They weren't going to let the secession succeed because it would have meant, that the oil reserves would no longer be accessible to whatever became Nigeria.
With that, the Nigerian military ensued full-blown war on the Igbos in Biafra.
It was a nightmare. The war that ensued was a nightmare. When you talk about war, there is nothing good about it. There's nothing good about war. There's destabilization that is involved. It's kind of made one wishing that they were dead, really.
Everything was very uncertain. There was no certainty, nothing was guaranteed.
And the British people were supplying the Nigerian government with arms and ammunition, airplane, and they were bombing our schools, our hospitals, our marketplaces, our churches, and people were dying in thousands. There was no military base in the eastern Nigeria. So we had nothing. We had nothing to fight with.
Biafra did not have an established military and were not armed with weapons of war.
And if the Nigerian army runs on beer and bullets, the Biafran army lacks both, with ammunition constantly in critically short supply.
Young Igbo men were conscripted to the Biafra military, and many Igbo families were torn apart. The Nigerian military was relentless as they continued to kill the Igbos in Biafra. The bloodshed and terror that took place in Biafra was unimaginable.
The Nigerian warplanes, fighter jets, would just randomly just run through villages and spray bullets across everywhere. And that time you don't know where to run to.
Homes, schools, churches, and marketplaces were destroyed.
Jet bombers will come to the villages, and nobody had anti-aircraft kind of weapons, so they did whatever they wanted.
These bombs were so powerful that if we had like a lantern on the table where we lived, which is about 8 miles away, the lantern would fall off, tip over. The walls would shake, the windows would shake like crazy. It was so, I could see, look at my father's face in those days, like how nervous he was, how we were going to survive the next day.
For the people of Biafra, death became a common occurrence, as dead bodies could be seen all over Biafran territory. There was absolute chaos and destruction.
Everybody was wailing and screaming. You could hear people crying from miles away.
Everybody was running here and there, trying to keep from being killed, by the air raids and all of that. So that prompted many Igbo people to have bunkers built near their houses so that when such air raids were in place, everybody ran into the bunker and prayed that their houses were not destroyed by the bombs and all of that.
If you were around, you could, the constant, sound of bombs and everything, and the hunger and the suffering was just too much.
In order to cut off Biafra from any external sources of aid and all form of commerce, the Nigerian government implemented an economic blockade by air, land, and sea, in hopes that this would weaken Biafra and allow the Nigerian military to conquer all of Biafran territory.
They blocked our seaports and our airport. No food was coming.
The cities in the Igbo heartland, once the most densely populated area in all of Africa, have been emptied of their people, emptied by the Igbos' fear of the federal Nigeria, leaving their homes shattered by shell fire.
Igbos were blockaded everywhere, you know, and there's a few people who tried to help the Igbos. They all land a plane at night, you know, at Uli Airport, a makeshift airport back then, land a plane at night to supply people with rice, cornmeal, stockfish and things like that, which were distributed around, to the people.
The International Red Cross, UNICEF, and Caritas International are amongst the known organizations that provided aid to Biafra. The aid provided was simply not enough to sustain the people. Innocent men, women, and children began to starve to death. Starvation was the main weapon of war. As a result of the blockade, Biafran hospitals did not receive the equipment needed to treat wounded soldiers, and starvation worsened. Young children began to suffer from kwashiorkor, which is a disease caused by malnutrition. Till this day, the images of children with bloated stomachs suffering from kwashiorkor represents the terror that took place in Biafra from 1967 to 1970. Images of children suffering from kwashiorkor were posted in international newspapers and news outlets across the world. This was done intentionally in hopes that the world would be informed of what was happening in Biafra and would initiate an international outcry of support. Unfortunately, efforts to garner international support were unsuccessful. The images of the devastation in Biafra were seen across the world. Nothing was done to stop it. The world turned a blind eye to Biafra as innocent men, women, and children were killed.
It was so unfortunate that the world looked on while innocent people were massacred.
When thousands of Igbos were butchered in the north, they didn't say anything. They didn't care. It didn't bother them. They were there when millions of children were suffering from kwashiorkor, they were being killed, markets were being bombed, not the troops or military part of Biafra, marketplaces, churches, schools were being bombed. Britain didn't raise an eye, America didn't raise an eye. It was in the news every night what was going on in Biafra, in the Western world. It was in the news every night. They pretended it never happened. People were marching on the street in Washington, in New York, in France, in Paris, marching. In London, marching against what is happening in Biafra. The government didn't do a damn thing.
In January of 1970, after 3 years at war, it was apparent that Biafra could no longer stand. Igbo military general Odumegwu Ojukwu left Biafra for the Ivory Coast. The suffering and death had come to a boiling point, and Biafra could no longer continue its fight for secession. Upon the departure of General Odumegwu Ojukwu, General Philip F. Young, who was his second in command, agreed to officially surrender to Nigeria. The Republic of Biafra had come to an end. The pain, the suffering, the death was over.
When they declared the war was over, there was a kind of both relief and a little bit of sadness. It's a day in history that none of us would. Everybody was crying. Yeah, we know we lost that war, It was a difficult and a welcoming, kind of welcomed event because of the suffering. Because we knew at that time, even as little as we were, as ignorant as we were in terms of power, we knew that we don't have anywhere left.
Biafra Nigeria's civil war is one of the bloodiest wars ever recorded in history. Over 1 million Easterners died as a result of the war. To the Igbos, this was not a war.
No, they didn't want to commit they committed genocide. They did. They didn't want to, they did. That's what it was.
How many thousands or how many millions would die for you to classify something as genocide? And where do you draw the line between a pogrom and a genocide? If you're on the receiving side, it's genocide. If you're on the giving side, you say no, you deny it, don't you? That's a normal process in life.
As a result of their defeat in the war, the Igbos have remained an oppressed and marginalized group in Nigeria.
As a kid, I remember my father. I can still remember the picture, image of my dad crying like a baby when the war came to an end. He wept so bitterly because he knew that the future of the Igbos would be at stake, that the Igbos are going to suffer, that Nigeria as a whole, they are going to deal with the Igbos for trying to leave the country. He said, this is not a time to rejoice because the future that awaits the Igbos is going to be terrible. And now as a full-grown woman, I can see what my father said. The history of the Igbos in Nigeria has been very terrible since after the war.
When I think of it, we were defeated. We were defeated, and that's the way we are treated today, as defeated people, okay? When General Gowan said, no victor, no vanquished, he was just, saying that for the sake of saying it, because, again, till today, the Igbo, being treated like defeated people.
We must not do anything that is going to make it impossible for us to reconcile at the end, or it will make the winning of the heart difficult in the end.
Igbos have not been integrated back into Nigeria. They are continuously marginalized. One of the reasons Nigeria is backward is because, of the non-acceptance of the Igbos.
Look at Nigeria today. It's even worse than when the Civil War started. It's even worse.
People are finding it difficult to even buy food to eat. It's the most unfortunate thing, given that Nigeria is a country blessed with so many resources, natural resources.
The Yorubas dominate the civil service now since the war ended. They have hiring practices, everything's within them. The Hausas the same thing, they're doing the same thing. Igbos are the ones who were kicked out of the Nigerian government completely. We don't have any, we don't even share in Nigerian prosperity. Thank God, we are people who are self-made people. We are purely business. We do our thing. And the same people who are depending on government and doing this, they are not doing better anywhere than Igbos are doing. Igbos are still ahead of them because we are self-made people.
In spite of their defeat, the Igbo people continue to impact any society they are a part of, despite the odds against them. For the Igbos, the concept of Biafra and its legacy will never be forgotten.
It might not be my generation. It might not be the 2 or 3 generations to come. But I strongly believe that one day, the Igbo man will have the opportunity to govern. The Igbos will have the opportunity to govern themselves. And Biafra nation shall rise again. That word Biafra will never die. One day, I might not live to see it, but I know within my heart, that there will be an Igbo nation born. Down the road, it will happen. We will have the freedom to govern ourselves. We will be free.